Welcome, everybody, to this Whole Life Action Hour. I am Ocean Robbins, your host, and I'm here today with somebody very special to me as well as to a lot of you, my dad and colleague, John Robbins. And I want to start with a little context here. Our world is facing some big problems, as we all know. That won't be news to any of you. We're awash in pesticides, our topsoil is being eroded, our aquifers are being depleted. Our climate's increasingly unstable. Every day on our planet, we have less ancient forests. We have more pollution in our environment and in our bodies. And more people are asking, what can I do? And is there even hope? And more often than not, the food that we eat has an incredible impact on all of this. So we're here today to talk a little bit about the fate of our world, the realities of what we're up against, and also the power that we have to make a difference, to be some part of the solution on this planet, and what that means to us and our sense of ourselves as humans. How can our food choices align with our core values, with what we want for ourselves, with what we want for our planet? This is a project of Whole Life Club, Food Revolution Network's ongoing membership community. And towards the end, we'll ask a couple of questions that have been submitted by our Whole Life Club members. So now a little bit about each of us. I'm here today with my dad and colleague, John Robbins, the author of Diet for New America, The Food Revolution, Healthy at 100, and 7 other bestsellers. His widespread media attention includes being featured on TV shows like Oprah, many others, having his own PBS special about his life and mission, and cover stories and features in newspapers from the New York Times to the Washington Post on down. And today he is president and co-founder with me of Food Revolution Network. And together we host the annual Food Revolution Summit and so many other programs and resources. And of course, we're also here with me, Ocean Robbins. I was born in a log cabin, as is famously known, built by my parents, and grew up eating an amazingly healthy food. And I am so honored to work with my dad in spreading this food revolution message to our 700,000 plus members, and to be able to talk with you today about things that matter. So let me start with a super big question for us to ponder together and explore together. Some people would say that humanity is on a collision course with systemic environmental collapse. These are sober times to be a human. We are participating in, we are driving a mass extinction event that may be occurring at a faster rate than any in the history of this world. In that context, you've been around this planet for more decades than I have. You've seen a lot. You've felt a lot. You've learned a lot. How do you cope with the lived experience of being a human in a world that's in such peril?
Well, first of all, by realizing that we are in perilous times and also precious times, because things aren't fully decided. There are some things that are baked in at this point, but there are other things that aren't, and there are still things that can be saved, and there is still love that can be expressed and felt, and there is still a lot that we can give to each other
Mm-hmm.
in these times.
Mm-hmm.
We can always bring love to the extent that we are capable of it. We can always raise our vibration and bring as much positive energy to the moment as we possibly can. We can always choose life and
Mm-hmm.
affirm life, and that may even be more important now, given the extent of the problems and the losses that are occurring than ever before. So I think that these times are actually very important.
Mm-hmm.
And there's grief. And for a lot of us, there's rage because what has already been done is causing so much suffering and will cause so much suffering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if we can open to that grief and to the anger, it can become a motivating force.
Right.
And that's what I want us to do, is to feel as motivated as possible
Yeah.
to act on behalf of life, on behalf of the life within us that knows what to do. We have guidance. We aren't alone in this. We have each other. We have the Food Revolution Network and other organizations that are working very hard and in a very deliberate and clear way to bring about as much positive change as is possible still.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great. I mean, we can do a lot yet.
We can, and there's something so powerful about doing what we can with what we have. One of the elements that you touched on that I want to expand on a little bit is the preciousness of life and awareness of our mortality as a species or as individuals. Our vulnerability can cause us to fortress and shut down and get scared and contracted because it's painful to face anything that hurts, and certainly the potential demise of our species is a very painful thing to face. But at the same time, it can also remind us that we're precious, that life is precious, and awaken us to not just mindlessly going on the path to oblivion, but actually creating something different and treasuring what we have. Those of us with blood in our veins and breath in our lungs and dreams in our hearts are so lucky. There's this old saying that a person with their health has 1,000 dreams, and a person without it has just one dream, which is to get it back. And one could say that a species that takes itself for granted has all kinds of things it's up to. But that moment when we realize that we can't take anything for granted could be a wake-up call that could ignite in us both a sense of gratitude and preciousness that we get to be alive on a planet that works. We get to have rain, we get to have food, we get to have an opportunity to breathe air that fills our lungs safely, and we also have an opportunity to keep contributing so that future generations can have that as well. And it's so true that hope is so alive as long as we're here, as long as we can have these conversations. And human creativity and ingenuity and is so profound. Humans have been through a lot down through the ages. Our ancestors, all of them, lived through circumstances that the odds were very much stacked against them, that they would even live long enough to reproduce. Many generations back, our ancestors, like majority of them, didn't make it to reproductive age per baby born. And all of us come from an unbroken chain of people that were the lucky ones and the survivors, right? And I personally, here I am talking to my dad, so I can feel the significance of this. And to me, that's like, wow, what a lineage, right? If nothing else, we've shown a tenacity for survival that is unbroken up to this point in our species for every single one of us that's alive. And so that's part of our strength, I think. We can be resilient. Our ancestors dealt with problems we can't even imagine. Now we're dealing with some problems they couldn't even imagine. But we also have opportunities they couldn't even imagine, and knowledge about the way the world works, and scientists that can actually think about climatology studies, and therefore we can apply kind of our intellectual brilliance and our tenacity for survival and maybe accomplish some amazing things.
Well, I agree with everything you're saying, Ocean, and appreciate it, and thank you for it. We may be in a hospice moment worldwide, globally, and that can be a beautiful thing. The awareness of death can feel morbid. It can feel like, oh gosh, who wants to think about that? But it can also make life very, very precious because we understand we don't have a moment to waste. That these moments that we have are ours now, and then they won't be anymore. That this life really is precious, and I don't mean precious in the sense of superficial, but in the sense of deeply significant. And we can make our lives deeply significant by the choices we make, by the statements we're making, by how we live. And we're always making statements by how we live. Sometimes they're conscious, sometimes they're not. We can make them more conscious, and we can make them on behalf of ourselves and of life. And that is where I think the food dimension really becomes significant, because when we make food choices that are healthiest for us individually, they give us the strongest immune system, so we are less susceptible to infectious disease. They give us the strongest respiratory system, the strongest cardiovascular system, so we're least susceptible to heart problems. Mm-hmm. They give us the highest vibrancy and vibration for life. They also, those same food choices, it turns out, and this is the beauty of working with you and spreading this message is this: the same food choices that are healthiest for each of us personally are also healthiest for the world and also kindest to the other animals who share this planet and who, after all, draw breath from the same source as we do. And when we live with that reverence and that understanding of our interconnection with all of life, so that what we do see and we act on that, what serves us serves others too. The food choices that give us the greatest vitality, the greatest joy in living, the greatest capacity to express our gifts and to care for each other. Those same choices spare the climate. They lower our greenhouse gas emissions. They lower our environmental footprint. They cause less biodiversity loss. They help us regain biodiversity in so many ways. And we can talk about the details of that if you'd like.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go there for a bit. I think this is so important for people to really understand. When you move up the food chain, you have a loss of efficiency. It's just kind of a basic biological reality that animals need to eat. And when we eat their flesh or their milk or their eggs, they're going to need to consume more calories than are in their flesh or milk or eggs, because some of those calories are going to go to hoof and hide and bones and feathers and energy they use to move and body heat they produce and all kinds of other factors. So you're creating an inherent inefficiency in a system. And it's a significant impact. It takes estimated 12 pounds of grain or soy to produce 1 pound of feedlot beef. Worldwide, 83% of our world's agricultural land is being used for animal agriculture to produce 18% of the world's calories. So when you have something that inefficient, then you have this enormous amount of waste, which means it's taking more, not just more land, but more water, more resources of every kind. And on top of that, animals tend to produce methane and other climate changing compounds. So animal agriculture is reducing our forest cover, and it's reducing our water available because we're using so much water to grow feed for livestock. It's because we're pushing our agricultural systems so hard, we're using more and more toxins on those systems, pesticides and chemical fertilizers and so forth, which are in turn depleting the soil and mortgaging the future for future generations. And all of this so that we can have this wasteful system that produces calories from animal agriculture, which in turn are causing sickness to us. So whatever environmental problem you're looking at, you will see a direct link to animal agriculture. And, we live in California where thankfully there's been a lot of rain recently. But in the big picture, the Western U.S., like many parts of the world, faces serious water problems because we're pumping water out of the ground at a far faster rate than it can be replenished. And the long game here is desertification for a lot of places because those aquifers are going to run dry sooner or later, and in many cases, sooner. So you combine that with the destabilization of climate change, and it's going to get harder and harder to grow food for humanity. And we are facing a food crisis looming as we suddenly may not have enough food for all the human mouths on the planet. But the good news is if we change our agricultural practices and feed humans directly, we can free up huge amounts of land that can grow food for humans, that can go back to forest, water that can be left in the ground, instead of being pumped out of the ground so we can feed our livestock lots and lots of calories. The benefits are profound. And the implications for the survival of tropical rainforests, for the survival of indigenous peoples that depend on their native ecosystems around the world, the implications for biodiversity are extraordinary. This is like a central lever for how humans can change our relationship to the natural world.
It really is. And it's one of the things that the meat industry doesn't want people to know about. Just like the oil and gas companies don't want people to even know that climate change is real. They've done everything they could to muddy the conversation and confuse people. And similarly, the meat and also the dairy and egg industries have joined forces to keep people unaware of the things we're talking about. They just want to confuse people. Mm-hmm. And they can fund studies, and they do fund studies, that are designed to create confusion. And then when people are confused, they default to the status quo. They don't make changes. And some of those changes are indispensable if we're going to have a habitable world. When you talk about how inefficient industrial agriculture is, feedlot beef production in particular, I'm thinking of the fact that as you mentioned, it takes 12 pounds of grain to make a single pound of feedlot beef. There are about 60 million to 100 million people expected to die of starvation on the planet this year.
Mm.
And that's a terrible thing. And
Yeah.
when we are wasting so much of our land our agricultural land, in order to grow livestock feed, if one person ate 10% less beef, if each of us ate 10% less beef, we would save enough grain. By that, we wouldn't have to feed it to the animals then. We would save enough grain to feed 60 to 100 million people. Now, there's no guarantee that that grain that we would save would reach those people, because those are the poorest people on the planet and they can't afford to buy it.
Yeah.
But there is a guarantee, and that is it will not reach them if we consume it ourselves, in effect, by cycling it through the animals whose bodies we eat and whose products from their bodies we eat.
Yeah.
And you and I both know, Ocean, and all of our listeners know, that not everybody is going to be willing to cut down 10%. Not everybody is going to do their part. Some people just, for whatever reason, won't.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone cuts down 20%, they're doing their part and covering for someone else. And if you cut down 100%, you're doing your part and covering for 9 other people. So we have a lot of leverage and power that we don't often recognize. And we can address world hunger this way. We can also address the extinction of species, which is, of course, biodiversity loss.
Yeah.
As meat production requires so much land, we're cutting down rainforests, we're cutting down other kinds of forests, which otherwise would be carbon sinks, and then they become carbon emitters. And we use that land to grow the feed for animals or graze cattle on it. And then that land becomes useless to the animals and plants for which it was home before. We destroy their habitats. And this is one of the leading engines of the loss of biodiversity. This is one of the leading engines that's causing what's now called the 6th great extinction that's taking place today. But this one wasn't caused by some asteroid hitting the planet and blowing up the worlds and causing the dinosaurs to go extinct. This one is happening much more rapidly than that one did, and it's happening at the hands of the 2-legged creature that we happen to be. So
An asteroid.
an asteroid, yes, we are the asteroid, but we are also the solution. We are also because we are the problem, we are also the solution. The extent of the damage that we are doing and have done is really great, but that is also the measure of the extent of the good that we can do if we reverse course, if we stop polluting the world and stop feeding appetites that are damaging us, that are causing our heart disease rates to skyrocket, our dementia rates to skyrocket. Right now in the United States, half of people age 85 or older have either Alzheimer's or even a worse form of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
That's a terrible disease. These are terrible, terrible afflictions that happen to our older people. And they're happening to so many of our older people. And yet we have many studies, good, credible scientific research, published in peer-reviewed, prestigious journals, showing us that with lifestyle changes and dietary changes, the same ones we're talking about to lower heart disease risk, the same ones we're talking about to lower our ecological footprint, the same ones we're talking about that lower our greenhouse gas emissions, lower our Alzheimer's rates dramatically.
Yeah.
So we don't have to lose our memories and our minds as we get older. We don't have to become frail versions of ourselves. We can stay alive and alert and bright and functional and able to love the people we love with our whole hearts and make a difference to the younger generations and to ourselves and to each other and everything we love. But we do need to change the way we eat and the way we produce the food that we eat. And that's why the Food Revolution Network, to me's work, is so very, very important today.
Yes, so important. Thank you for all that. And I want to bring in another layer to this, which is money. And there's two aspects to this that I want to touch on. One is y'all have probably noticed the price of food's gone up a lot in the last couple of years. In some cases, we're seeing prices that are double for the same item what they were a couple of years, few years ago. It's exceeded the cost, the inflationary curve in general, and driven it and fueled it. And um, there are many factors behind this. The pandemic created supply chain disruptions. The war in Europe is causing a lot of disruptions of feed and fertilizer and food movements around the world. Um, and climate chaos is having an impact. Some places have not been able to grow food they used to, which then creates more demand and less supply relative to, or more demand relative to supply, which drives prices up. So all of these are factors. And here's the thing: for some people, if the price of food goes up, it's an inconvenience. For other people, it's a matter of life and death, because we need to eat in order to survive as humans. And um, around the world, functionally, when we waste grain and soy by cycling it through livestock, we are, in a sense, the wealthy nations and places that can afford livestock products are, in a sense, competing with the world's poor for those calories. And they can pay more in a bidding war, which is what it all comes down to at the end of the day. And so when we look at the impact on world hunger of livestock production, there's a very direct impact there. And it's not just about whether or not people can eat at all, but it's also how much of their savings and their resources and income are going to food, and how does that affect the quality of the rest of their lives. And so when we lower on the food chain, we take some of that strain off of our world's agricultural systems. We make it easier to feed everybody. And then that brings the prices down. And that helps the poor the most. The other layer here that I want to bring in is the cost of our health care / disease care system. In the United States, we spend 19% of our entire gross domestic product on what we call health care, which, as we all know, is really disease symptom management. And we could likely save more than $1 trillion every single year in this country, possibly significantly more than $1 trillion per year, with changes to diet and lifestyle. Now, when we have all of the folks in Congress arguing over budgets and all the political strife that goes on about what a nation can afford, I have to look at how much we are spending, wasting, on being sick, on treating the symptoms of illness. It's not like what we're getting out of that is great radiant health. We're getting survival in the context of sickness and misery and pain. And in fact, more and more of us are living chronically sick. The average senior in the United States is on 5 prescription drugs every single day, 14 prescriptions per year. More and more of us are hurting, and the pills keep piling up. And as somebody who wants to see people healthy and well, that breaks my heart, because I want to help people have as much pleasure, as much joy, as much peace in their bodies as they can. And the economics of it, though, are massively impactful, and they're sucking the lifeblood out of economies. They're sucking the lifeblood out of families. 2/3 of the bankruptcies in the United States are driven by medical costs. So many elders, instead of leaving their children an inheritance from whatever they may have saved over their lifetime, it all gets sucked dry in the last years. And their kids end up spending their prime earning years taking care of aging parents who are suffering when they could be, earning more. So this creates intergenerational cycles of poverty. It creates systemic lack. And all of this, the point of saying all this, of course, is that we can do so much better, and that when we lower on the food chain and replace factory farmed animal products with wholesome, healthy plant foods, we can radically improve our health span, our lifespan, do good for the collective economy, do good for our personal economies, and contribute to helping end world hunger. And that's just so many ripples to this that are so profound.
Yeah, I often think that one of the obstacles that we need to overcome is that we have tended to look at meat eating as the reward of affluence. And we've tended to look at things like beans and other legumes as peasant foods and stick up our nose at them and look down on them. And it's odd that we do that because beans and legumes are actually the cornerstone of all the Blue Zone diets. They are what the healthiest and longest lived peoples on earth base their diets around. And if we want to live the longest and healthiest lives possible for us, we might want to follow their example. But we've tended to think that, well, we're wealthy, so we can afford meat, so we should have it.
Hmm.
And as you point out, Ocean, when we do that, we're eating at the expense of the poor because we're out competing them. Those of us who have money and can afford these things. And furthermore, our subsidy systems that the U.S. government in particular provides are so perverse. They're so out of whack with reality. We subsidize the least healthy foods. We subsidize livestock feed. So that lowers the price per pound to the consumer of meat so that they can get it. But we don't subsidize broccoli. We don't subsidize any whole foods, whole plant foods hardly at all. We,
Yeah.
we, we subsidize sugar a lot. We subsidize processed oils and dairy products a lot. We subsidize high fat, high sugar foods a lot. We subsidize all kinds of factory farm and industrial animal products.
Hmm.
Those are the foods that every nutritionist and every dietitian almost in the world is telling us we should be eating less of. I mean, I think if we're going to subsidize anything food wise, we should be subsidizing the foods that are healthiest for us, that will give us the healthiest lives and lower our costs medically and lower our impact on the planet and enable us to live lightly on the earth and enable us to live with light and love and laughter and joy instead of with the heaviness and the heart disease
Yeah.
that we've come to associate with the good life. You know, we've bought into an idea that consuming more is better, always more consumption, and that unlimited consumption is the goal. Well, I think that's more like the ideology of the cancer cell, really,
Mm.
unlimited growth. And really, I'm more interested in if we could find the key to unlimited compassion and how to live with reverence for each other in life and for the whole web of life, the whole food chains, the whole exquisitely intricate life that's happening on this planet
Mhm.
with so much exquisiteness and so much complexity and interwovenness. When we can find our rightful place in that, living with respect for life, living with reverence for ourselves and each other and the whole of life on earth, then I think we won't try to live like kings and eat the affluent diet. We'll live the diet, we'll eat and live to fulfill our highest purpose on this planet, the purposes for which we were born,
Mm.
the purposes that make our hearts sing when we fulfill them.
Yeah.
And then we will also be contributing, this is the glorious thing, we'll also be contributing to a more habitable world for more people and buying time, frankly, so that the changes that are needed to create a way of life on this planet that's environmentally sustainable, that's spiritually fulfilling, and that's socially just can take place.
Yeah. So profound. I want to touch on another aspect to all this, which I know is very deep and dear to your heart, which is, the word human is very closely related to the word humane. And it strikes me that human treatment of animals in today's factory farms in particular is profoundly inhumane, and it seems to me that it runs counter to something very basic about our actual nature as human beings. You know, we all most of us have animals in our lives that we have loved, dogs or cats or goats or other critters. Not all of us, but many of us have had that experience of crossing the species barrier and feeling that love doesn't need words and it doesn't need intellectual thoughts. You can feel, if you've ever had a companion animal and you look in their eyes and they're purring, or the dog comes over and like its whole world is just made brighter by you touching it, and it wants to be petted so bad. It wants to, there's that connection. You feel it. For any of us who've ever had that opportunity, and of course not everybody has, but many of us have. Um, and then we look at what humans are doing to cows and pigs and chickens and industrialized operations, and the way that it is kept from our view so that we won't even see it because we wouldn't condone it. If people knew what was really happening, if they had to watch where their animals spend a day walking around that feedlot, and then watch the spot where the animals are being killed, and squealing in horror, most folks would say, no, I don't want to eat that. Thank you very much. Um, but it's kept from us. And I wonder what happens to our sense of our humanity to partake in that system.
Yeah,
Maybe we,
I wonder about that too. And I think the human animal bond is being frayed by it. I think it's being irritated by it. I think it's being harmed by it. And that takes something away from our spirits because our spirits live in interrelationship with all of life. That's who we are. We're human animals. And we seem to have created a kind of schizoid relationship to animals. Like, as you mentioned, a lot of us have dogs and cats and other animals in our lives that we love. And we may pay for their food and we pay for their vet bills and they sleep on our beds with us and they're part of our families. And when they die, we grieve. We really grieve, which tells us how much we love them and how much they loved us and how much love there was in that relationship. So some animals we treat with tremendous respect and regard, but then we make a semantic distinction and we call other animals livestock.
Mhm.
And by virtue of that semantic distinction, we somehow feel entitled to treat those other animals with any manner of cruelty so long as it lowers the price per pound. And that's the game that modern meat is playing. That's the game that industrial meat production is playing. They do everything they can to lower the price per pound, and that means treating the animals with a degree of cruelty and causing the animals a level of misery that is just abominable. You don't have to be a vegetarian, you don't have to be an animal rights oriented type of person to be appalled if you see it. It's that extreme. You don't have to be even a particularly empathic human being to find it deplorable and to want nothing to do with it and to want it to stop if you see it. That's how extreme it is.
Yeah.
And the industry knows that. And so they passed laws. They've gotten laws passed called ag-gag bills. And this is legislation that makes it illegal to take pictures or videotapes or any type of images of these operations.
Yeah.
It makes it illegal for you to know what they're doing to the animals. If a journalist takes pictures, takes videotapes, takes film, and sneaks it out and wants to show it to the world, they're violating these ag-gag laws. And they're risking felonies, they're risking time in prison. Sometimes they actually get that. They get convicted of felonies and they spend time in prison, sometimes a long time in prison, for the crime of showing to the world how our food is produced, which we should have a right to know about. We really should have a right to know about, but the industry's doing terrible things to these animals.
Yeah. I want to actually, in that light, I want to share a story. One of my heroes. I interviewed him when I was writing my book, 31 Day Food Revolution, and it's a man named Craig Watts. And Craig's from North Carolina, and he was a chicken farmer. And for a couple of decades, he'd been in the chicken farming business in the Purdue operation system. So the way it works is that Purdue would provide farmers like him with chicks and feed and rules for how to do their operation. he would do all that. He'd be sort of on the hook for the money. Then he'd sell for all the costs, and then he'd sell the chickens back to them when they were ready for slaughter for a certain price, and that's all locked in. And the difference, the profits, is what he has to live on and pay back the debts from getting the whole operation built out in the first place. And after about 20 years in business, he'd almost gotten out of debt from all the infrastructure it took to get it going in the first place. He wasn't making a whole lot. But he had about 30,000 birds in his operation, and he did not like the way he was treating them. Just to give a few examples of what was happening, and he was winning awards from Purdue for his operation and his productivity. He was being inspected weekly. In his operation, he was not allowed to have any open windows because fresh air would make the birds move more, which would reduce the feed conversion ratio. He actually wasn't allowed to have any natural light. It always had to be controlled so that it would be the certain amount that would maximize the rate at which they would grow to, again, produce more calories per feed. But these birds were bred to be morbidly obese. It was the equivalent to if a human infant by the age of 6 months would weigh about 600 pounds. And so they were so obese that they couldn't walk in many cases. They were sitting in feces, not just from themselves, but from generations of birds before them. The barn was cleaned. It was concrete, but it was cleaned about every 2 years. So there's these generations of fecal material. They're lying in feces. They can't walk. They developed abscesses and sores. They lose feathers. And then about 5% of the birds would be dead on the floor before it came time to harvest them and kill them. So there's dead bodies, there's open sores, there's birds lying in poop that are too obese to walk. And this is the norm. This is his Purdue award-winning operation. But Craig Watts was watching TV one day, and he sees an ad, and Jim Purdue comes on and says, "Our chickens are treated well, they're happy, and they're healthy." And Craig was getting pretty bitter about the way Purdue was treating him and other farmers like him economically. Maybe that's what tipped him over the edge. But he watches this ad and he says to himself, "I'm no doctor or vet, but I know these birds are not healthy. I'm not a psychologist, but I can tell you they're not happy. And I might be doing things that are cruel, but I am not a liar. And if I allow this ad to be unchallenged, then I am complicit in a lie." So he invited Compassion in World Farming, led at the time by a woman named Leah Garces, who is now the leader of Mercy for Animals. He invited them to come in to inspect his award-winning Purdue chicken farm with the cameras rolling. And he did an interview and showed what was happening and talked about it. And this was not a case of some undercover investigator sneaking in and showing the worst stuff for effect. This was a case of an award-winning farmer inviting the cameras in, opening the doors up, and showing what his award-winning farm actually looked like. And the video ended up going viral, being shown on lots of national TV programs. And Purdue was not happy. They wound up punishing him in all kinds of ways, trying to make it sound like he was a bad apple, to which he could just say, "Well, I've been inspected every week. I was doing exactly what I was told to do. I was forbidden to open the windows," right? Like he was following the laws and the rules. This was the amount of space the birds were supposed to have. And so eventually, thank goodness, Craig Watts got out of the chicken farming business. He's now growing other crops on his land. And he now has a profession where he helps factory farmers to transition to other occupations. Bless his heart. And, I think about people like Craig Watts, the courage it took. I never would have thought a man like that would be one of my heroes, but he is. And the courage it took to risk his entire livelihood, his reputation, his family's financial future, for his sense of integrity, and then to find a new path. And I'm inspired by that. And I also want us to learn from what he showed us. Because when I look at an operation like that, we all know that a situation like that cannot but breed suffering and illness for humans as well. The pathogens that breed in an environment like that are one way or the other, they're bad for us. And we are breeding antibiotic resistant bacteria. Now, 3/4 of chicken and turkey samples found in supermarkets in the United States have antibiotic resistant bacteria on them. Stuff that actually may not be cured by antibiotics. We are essentially creating biological weapons factories in our factory farms. So the products of this cruelty aren't just bad for the animals. They're bad for all of us. And they're especially bad for our future and the viability of antibiotics for future generations. And so when I look at all this and I see the suffering from the environmental impact, the water impact, the animals that are living in these conditions, the human bodies, the heart attacks, the cancer, the diabetes, the obesity, and the antibiotic resistant bacteria, and we say, oh my gosh, we could do something about all of that. We get to choose. We do not have to partake in this system.
One of the reasons the meat, dairy, and egg industries, and including the Purdue chicken people, have been so resistant to any legislation that would lower the amount of antibiotics that they use and try to preserve our antibiotics for their rightful purpose, which is to cure bacterial infections in people,
Yeah.
and in animals for that matter. But they're used as feed additives. They're used, they're injected into the animals or fed to the animals with every meal they eat in factory farms because the conditions are so morbid. The animals are so crammed together that any disease that starts, it's going to spread so fast, and the whole flock will get infected and die. So they're using 80% of the antibiotics that are produced in the United States are not given to human beings who are sick and need them. They are given, and not even given to people wrongly who have viral infections, which antibiotics are worthless against. They're 80%, over 80% is given to animals in feedlots and factory farms. And this is done because you can't run a system the way Craig Watts was required to do by Purdue, the way all industrial factory farming is done today. You can't do it without antibiotics and without a whole host of other biocides that keep the pests down. And it's a poisonous situation, and it's filled with poisons. And we're undermining our use of antibiotics. We're undermining their efficacy. And this is a very serious problem, and everybody in public health knows it. Everybody in Western medicine knows it. They're seeing rapidly now increases in diseases, bacterial diseases in people that are not treatable with even our first or second or third line antibiotics. And what a travesty. In order to have cheap meat, we're willing to subject animals to these horrible conditions. And we're willing to undermine the drugs that have saved so many lives. Antibiotics were the miracle drugs that basically made Western medicine successful at one point. They were the first great drugs that we ever had, because you can take an antibiotic. If you have the right antibiotic for a bacterial infection that's susceptible to that antibiotic, you can eliminate the infection with the antibiotic.
Yeah.
And we have eliminated a lot of bacterial diseases that used to kill and maim and harm hundreds of millions of people every year. And we've been able to stop that with antibiotics, but we're going to lose that ability to use those drugs in that way because we're allowing these industries to successfully fight every legislative effort to mandate that they use less or use none. And it's a travesty. And I don't know why every doctor in the country isn't up in arms about it, because they're going to lose their power to treat bacterial infections successfully. Mm-hmm. Because we have wanted to produce cheap meat, and we've wanted to do that by putting animals into these just grotesque conditions.
Yeah.
And it's painful to me to see. And but it is something we can do something about.
Yeah.
And we can do a lot about it. When we eat a whole food plant-based diet, we're eating lower on the food chain. We're subjecting our bodies to far less pesticides and other toxic chemical residues. We are clearing our cardiovascular system. We have cleaner arteries that allow for better blood flow to all of our organs, including our brains. So we have less cognitive impairments. We have less of dementias. We have brighter minds, able to think more deeply about what really matters. And we then are eating so others can live, so others can simply eat. I mean, as Gandhi said, we live simply so others can simply live. If we eat simply, then others can eat simply too.
Yeah.
And there is so much to be gained by eating lower on the food chain, by eating less meat. Sometimes people say, well, are you saying we all need to be vegans? No, I'm not. If you want to be a vegan, more power to you, but you don't have to be. If you cut down 20%, if you cut down 30%, you cut down 50%, you're doing a lot to help the world. You're doing a lot to help your body. The more you cut down, the more you're doing, but do what you can. And if you do what you can, the amount that you can do will expand.
Yeah.
If you don't do what you can, the amount that you can do will diminish and will contract. And your life force will become lesser. And your sense of possibility and your sense of hope and your sense of understanding your connection to what's happening on the earth will develop in one way or the other.
Yeah.
And we have it in our own hands. We have it on our own plates. And the food choices we make so much more difference than we often know.
Mm-hmm.
The food industry will say, the processed food industry in particular will say, well, they're good for you foods and they're fun for you foods. And a balanced diet is equal parts. Well, these so-called fun for you foods, ultra-processed foods, high in salt, high in sugar, high in bad fats, high in a lot of chemicals whose names you and I probably don't even know how to pronounce, are undermining our well-being on levels that we don't even know about. Every study you can look that's published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal that isn't funded by the processed food industry, by the Grocery Manufacturers Association, every study shows that the less processed food you eat, the less animal products you eat, the healthier you're going to be, and the brighter your life is going to be. And why is it that in the face of that reality, so many of us have normalized eating food that's damaging us, hurting us, eventually killing us, and taking down the world with us and causing so much animal suffering at the same time?
Yeah.
We need to normalize eating real, simple, whole plant foods and basing our diet around them. And if you eat 100% and are a vegan, great. If you go 90%, great. 80%, great. Do what you can. And then you will be able to do more.
Yeah. So true. And, it is a reality that in general, when we are down, when we're depressed, we're more likely to make the very choices that make us more depressed. I mean, statistically, depressed people are less likely to exercise, less likely to eat consciously or well. And so you could say the opposite of depression is expression, is choice, is authorship, is positive, constructive movement, which then is liberating of life energy, which creates a positive feedback loop. Because when you eat better, you feel better. And when you feel better, you do better, including eating better. And so part of what we're trying to do here is help everybody watching right now to develop your own positive feedback loops. And this shows up on a personal level for your own sense of hope for your own life. It also shows up on a collective level. You see, I believe that when humans are part of the solution, when we feel like we're part of contributing to making something better, our hearts open. Our lives become fuller. We don't look at the problem with denial. We don't push it away. We don't feel buried under a weight of cynicism. we feel our hearts open to some sense of possibility. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other, like, okay, humanity's got it covered, we're going to be fine, because that would be a complete lie, right? I'm also not going to say it's doomed and it's all over. We're actually in this interesting moment when the choices we make have a profound impact. And we as individuals get to participate. Which side of history are we going to be on? And with our food choices, we get an opportunity to be on the right side of history, if I may be so bold, to participate in contributing to a world where there is more water, more land, more carbon sequestered, more forests, more compassion. And that to me is such a beautiful opportunity. And my experience is that a lot of people who've moved towards a plant-based diet, often that's a step. And then there are other steps they may take to be a part of the solution. They have more energy. They start volunteering in their local church or community center. They have more time and energy for doing the things they love, playing with their grandkids. They start to be a part of nonprofits. They start to contribute to environmental organizations or restoration or ecosystem restoration. And they may end up, getting electric cars, whatever the things are that are next on their process of feeling like, hey, I'm going to do something good. I'm going to contribute in whatever way I can. And those are so different for all of us. But I would assert that every single one of us has some part to play that's uniquely ours that could make a contribution. And as Helen Keller said, I'm only one person. I can't do everything. But just because I can't do everything does not mean I will refuse to do that which I can. And we can all do something, and we all eat. And when we choose to eat more local, more sustainable, more fair trade, more organic, as well as lower on the food chain, we are participating in building a healthier food economy and a healthier world. And that is a beautiful feeling that also happens to be really, really good for us.
And it's an antidote to depression.
Yeah.
It really is. People who feel depressed feel there's nothing they can do that's going to make them feel better. There's nothing they can do to make a difference to the problems that are so severe and that are impinging on them and impinging on life. And there's a lot of reasons to be depressed today. There's a lot of things going wrong. But if you take action, if you do the things that you can, that raise your vibration, that give you a higher sense of possibility, and that you take advantage of the opportunities that you see, then you will see more of them and more will come your way. And when you do what you can, then life will bring you. Life says, oh, that's one of the guys or the women. That's one of the people who really is going to make a difference. So they'll bring you challenges. They'll bring you obstacles. They'll bring you difficulties that you will be able to surmount, that you will be able to overcome, that you will be able to convert into opportunities to deepen your prayer for life, deepen your participation in the ongoing beauty of this world, and deepen your capacity to love and to care about and care for the people and the other beings that are dear to you. And this is one of the things that really will lift depression for anybody, is knowing that their love matters to another person.
Yeah.
And you'll know it when you'll see its efficacy. You'll see your love lighting up the heart of another person. Mm. That really lifts depression fast. And some of us don't know how to do that. So start with what you can do to raise your vibration, to eat higher vibration foods, to eat lower on the food chain, more whole plant foods, the foods of the way nature intended. And don't forget the beans, the lowly legumes, the foods that have been so stigmatized in our society. Oh, I remember once being on the Donahue show. It was a talk show that was very popular back in the 80s and 90s, and I was on it, and I was on it with the actor River Phoenix, who passed away way too early and was a close friend of mine. And on it, Phil Donahue asked me, well, where do you get your protein? And I said, from beans. And he said, beans? And he just wrinkled up his face. And I thought, what's wrong with beans? Mm-hmm. Why have we stigmatized the foods that are the cornerstones, the foundations of all the longevity diets on the planet? They are the basis of all the Blue Zone diets. And Dan Buettner, the National Geographic explorer, who discovered the blue zones and has written about them so prolifically and brought them to our attention so beautifully, says that if we all ate beans several times a week, we'd add 2 to 3 to 5 years to our lifespans.
Hmm.
And those would be healthy years. I mean,
Just from one food right there.
just from one
Yeah.
food a few times a week,
Yeah.
because it would replace the meat, the other protein sources, which are bad for us.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We've also bought into the idea that animal protein is superior to plant-based protein, that it's more complete. And that turns out not to be true. There are some amino acids that exist in higher levels in animal protein, but there are others that exist in higher levels in plant proteins. As long as you eat a diversity of plant foods, you will get enough protein, and as long as you're not eating junk food, because it's the foods that don't have any protein.
Right.
Coca-Cola has no protein at all. Energy drinks have no protein in them at all. You don't actually need protein powders. If you eat whole plant foods, you'll get and a diversity of them. You will get enough protein, and it will be a higher quality protein that won't raise your risk of cancer, won't raise your risk of dementia, won't raise your risk of heart disease, won't raise your risk of gaining weight and possibly becoming obese. It will lower all those risks instead.
Yes. So wonderful. Thank you. Um, well, we're nearing the end of our time here, and I want to get to a couple quick questions that we heard from. First one I'll address was from Nova, who asked, how can I conserve water in my normal, usual life daily routines? Nova, I want to thank you for that. So first of all, I'll say, in terms of the day-to-day things you can do that a lot of people don't really think about, like when you're washing dishes, you can, have put the big things like pots or whatever in the bottom, and then as you're washing other things, let the water drain down and fill the pots up. So your water's getting multiple uses. You can turn off the water, fill things up and soap and scrub, and then rinse, but not have to have water running the whole time. You can obviously turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth. You can, if you want to go a little further, you can set up, like we've actually created a little pump that takes our laundry water and pumps it up to water the garden. A lot of people are working with gray water, rainwater catchment, all sorts of things. These are wonderful. They help, especially they help on a local level, right? Because if you've got a well or a local water supply that's limited, then you want to do what you can to conserve. And those are all lovely things. And a lot of people have given up their lawns and are focusing on, if they have a garden, making sure they have really good irrigation systems that are water conservational rather than like air sprayers that spray the air and get a lot of moisture loss. There's all kinds of good things you can do. That said, on a grand level, the biggest thing you can do is what we've been talking about today, and that's to eat lower on the food chain. It takes about 2,000 gallons of water to produce a single pound of feedlot beef. So you use more water for that 1 pound of beef than you would in 3 months worth of showering. So sure, you can use a low flow shower head and you can soap up and turn off the water while you're soaping up. You can do things like that. But at the end of the day, that's all minuscule in the grand scheme compared to eating lower on the food chain. So the number one thing you can do if you want to save water for the larger, greater whole is, again, eating lower on the food chain. It's just dramatic. And beef's the biggest water hog, so to speak, but all of the livestock production is wasteful. Even people talk about almonds in California, and there's no question almonds use a lot of water in California. California produces 80% of the world's almonds. Almonds use about 15% of the state's water supply. But even there, cow's milk, more water goes into a gallon of cow's milk than a gallon of almond milk. So, even there, and almonds are not the most efficient crop. But I'm just saying, if you want to go towards water conservation, lower on the food chain is just a universal principle. Joanne asked, please share your insight on what actually helps create the mind shift that allows a person to move to help themselves and help the planet one bite at a time. You've watched the ahas thousands of times with people you've inspired. You know all the influences and programs, internal and external. Please reflect on observing that magical moment and share how we can illustrate this point. What actually happens?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's highly individual.
Yeah.
But a lot of times sharing food helps. If someone makes a dish that's a whole food, plant-based dish and brings it to a potluck, and other people are bringing the standard fare. Or someone brings desserts and it's some high rich cream based dessert full of sugar, and someone else brings a bowl of berries. I remember once doing that. I went to an event and I knew people would be bringing desserts, and we were asked to do that. And I brought a bowl of berries, different berries, blueberries and raspberries and blackberries, actually, I think. And the person I was with said to me, "Well, that's not going to go work. Nobody's going to eat that. They're going to, they'll go to the rich desserts that are there that they're used to, the
Yeah.
fancy things, the pastries and so forth." And I said, "Well, maybe so, but this is in integrity for me."
Hmm.
What actually happened at that event was, and I brought a lot of berries. All the berries got eaten before, and at the end of the evening, I looked and there were no berries left. All the plates full of berries were empty, and the rich desserts were sitting there. And so people had found that they really didn't want the expected thing, and they ate the simpler thing, the more natural thing, and they felt better for it. And that kind of thing, feeding people good food, healthy food in different ways, will often overcome their fear that if they eat that way, they'll be deprived. They
Right.
won't have the pleasure of the table that they're used to.
Yeah.
And learning that plant-based foods can be prepared in ways that are exquisitely delicious, that
Hmm.
have all the interesting flavors and textures and mouthfeel that the industry works so hard to create and hijack our taste buds in the process.
Hmm.
We can reclaim our taste buds. And by sharing food, giving food to people who may not be on board for this, lecturing them probably isn't going to go very far. Looking down on them is definitely not going to work. But when you love them and feed them, and you give them food that they're going to like, suddenly something opens in them to you and to what you're about and to what you're sharing and to what they themselves now know is possible for them, which they can enjoy this food. It's
Yeah.
not deprivation, it's pleasure. And it's an even greater pleasure for knowing that you are, as you put it, Ocean, on the right side of history. You're aligning yourself now with the good in the world, the beauty in the world, the life in the world, and you're supporting it. And you're making a statement that you can live with through every day of your life and on your deathbed. When you look back on your life, as we all get the chance to do at some point, you'll feel good that you made a contribution to the healing that was so needed. However large or however small, you made that contribution. And who knows what ripples went out from that? Who knows how many people were touched and moved and evoked by that to themselves being part of the healing
Mm.
that is so desperately needed, so deeply needed today.
Yeah. I would just close by saying sometimes pain pushes, sometimes vision pulls. A lot of people are motivated by crisis to make big changes. My personal belief is that the push of pain can be abrupt and urgent and decisive, but it is not sustainable. You will be best sustained if over time you also have a positive vision of what you're going towards. Vitality, health, wellness, self-love, self-care, self-respect, integrity, sense of being on the right side of history, coherence between your values and your actions. These are the kinds of things that will help you to feel a sense of dignity, a sense of peace, a sense of wholeness, a sense of joy. So pain can push you out of bad habits into radical change because you realize where you're headed and you realize your life is on the line. But you don't want to live in perpetual adrenaline and reaction from fear. You want to eventually be moved forward by what calls you. And the more you can root in that for your continuity, the more likely you are to succeed long term and also to be a light to the world. Because I truly believe that the world needs more of us lit up, coherent with our values, on purpose. And that is leadership. that will inspire others to find their values, their wellness, and then live accordingly. So thank you, everybody, for joining us in this conversation. And I'll just say how grateful I am to work with my dad in sharing this. What a privilege.
Well, Ocean, being your father is the greatest privilege of my life, and working with you is one of the greatest privileges of my life. And getting to do this work is one of the greatest privileges of my life. And knowing that we're helping people to help themselves and to grow stronger in their own integrity and to grow deeper in their own capacity to love. Who could ask for anything more?
Yeah. We'll leave it at that. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful day. When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club.